The first process, solely account driven. If it was in an account, it got charged back to one GL string, and that's how it was done. The second process we had was about 80% account driven, and then the remaining 20% of our costs were resource driven back chargeback with a variety of different tags, including the environment, customers, DCLs, etc. So we had a lot of places to look. Next thing to look at was our toolkit at the time. Our toolkit included a lot of Excel, Athena, a lot of people, and a lot of time. And so when we start off there and we move into some of the early innovations, we went through several different phases, including an awareness, a crawl phase, a walk phase, and a run phase. But not all these innovations kind of ended up on that scale. Some things were very much running when we probably needed to be back walking. So at least as far as innovations and automations that we came up with, it was very much a running, come back, make sure we learned the basics, and then build from that to get to the next point in our automation cycle. And so that brings us to our first one, machine learning. I leveraged a text analytics on the tags and labels for that second chargeback to attempt to automate 100% of the process. I thought machine learning could do this 100% of the time. After some feedback from my boss, I learned that it could do it 60% of the time. But hey, 60% of the time is still better than flipping a coin. So we added that one into our process, and that one was very much a run phase, just overall. Machine learning, there are probably some more base things you need to accomplish first. For example, automating the queries that we used to do to get the data out of the curve. For that, I ended up utilizing Bodo 3 to pull that in and remove the need for manual queries. 100% of the need for manual queries, thank you. So while that was a great automation for us, I kind of consider this more of a crawl phase as we're going through things. Dashboarding, we leveraged Tableau. In my MBA background, that's what we did. It increased observability throughout the organization so the engineering teams could see everything. This is more of a walk phase as far as automations go. And then finally, kind of the straw that really got us into the walking and going forward with the automation was the application-driven showback. For this one, we used what we had learned in the above, couple of automations to come up with a unifying process and really kind of flesh out what our business rules were for us. And this was probably where we really started walking as Pearson. At this time, and I believe it'll show up, our toolkit also expanded. We still had some Excel. We're still leveraging Athena, but now we had Bodo 3 in there. Now we were using Python as opposed to spreadsheets. Now we were using Tableau. Still took some man hours, but it was greatly reduced. And yeah. And so one of the first things that I want to step back and make sure that we all understand, this is in the awareness, grasping fully loaded costs. To quote a book that I'm sure we are all very familiar with, if not, it is in your swag bag. Please read it. Fully loaded costs are amortized, reflect the actual discounted rates, equitably factor in shared cost, and are mapped to the business organizational structure. That's very good, but it doesn't quite give you like the breakdown, especially in the AWS terms. What does amortized mean? Well, in AWS terms, it means on demand plus your savings plan covered usage, as well as your reservation covered usage. Reflects the actual discounted rates. It also includes discounts, refunds, and credits. Equitably factors in shared costs, taxes, marketplace, and other surplus costs that could come in, and are mapped to the organization's business structure. For Pearson, this came down to our application tagging. And so, getting into stride. Once we finalized our methodologies, got some business sign off on it, and with our big forecast into 2022, so this was back in 2021. Whoa, that is missing something. We achieved show back there, but with the Tableau dashboards, an organizational adjustment that took place within Pearson at the time, and getting our data lake up and running, that's when we really fully transitioned into chargeback. And so to talk about the data lake piece, I'm going to pass it over to Abhash.
So the journey till now, what James explained, has been more of a crawl and walk phases. So the requirement from our stakeholder also came in as most of the chargeback that we did was on account level. Yes, there were some exceptions, like James pointed out, but still, about 80–85% was still account level, right? So the requirement was, hey, all the teams started hitting us, and they were like, we need to go to application level chargeback, right? So that's why we started to go that route. But now to depend on application level chargeback and depend on some tagging, right, for that, to know, we are now analyzing a lot of data. So if we start doing more manual work, that's not even feasible, right? So we started looking at, hey, how do we go automate, right? So that's why we started looking at tools. We consulted with AWS, and then we started our journey through Datalake, right? So Datalake is just a central repository to where you could put in a lot of data, and it doesn't need to be one sort of data or the other. It's a centralized repository. So we put in right now, currently, our core data sits on the Datalake. We have two big master pairs. And Pearson, as an organization, our core file itself is huge, right? So another beauty of Datalake is also its scaling. So it can hold tons of data, right? So that's another beauty of it. So and data can also be stored as is. So you don't need to have a schema. You don't think of it as a database or a data warehouse, so it can go as is. If you have flat files, you have CSVs, you have anything, you can put it out there. And various, level of people in your organization could then hit up that data and get some analytics or whatever they want to do out of it, right? We did this for more cross-charge purpose, but on our roadmap, there's a lot of things that is going to happen with the data, forecast, budget, or various other things, right? So that's our roadmap, but right now we are focused on just the cross-charge. So just the basic Pearson data lake overall picture, this is like you have all different varieties of fishes living in that data lake, right? Think of that, all of that fishes are your various data, right? It could come from your curve file, it could come from some governor, it could come from some LDAP, finance, you name it, right? But I'm just giving you an example of, all these varieties of data can just live together on that data lake. And then what we do in Pearson, and this is just the overall picture, is this data depot, right? So that's where what we do is from unstructured data on the data lake, we run some ETL, we do some transformation, we polish that data, and then when it's nice looking, we put it on the data depot, and then it can be used by any of the graphical tool you want, for various reasons. So like Excel, Grafana, Tableau, Power BI, name it, you could just take that data anywhere and use it. This is kind of, I just put it together as an easy, understandable architecture of what we do. So first, on the data lake, what we do is the raw files. So there's a S3 bucket. All the raw file goes into that S3 bucket. And it's variety of other, like I explained before, it could be curve file, it could be some application level data or anything, but we put it on this raw file S3 bucket. Then we run some glue crawlers. So I'll go a little bit later on more glue, and that's what we have been using as a tool for our automation. So we use glue crawlers to crawl those files and then come up with a data catalog. So data catalog is, you don't have to define the structure, but then after looking at that data, it'll come up with, okay, hey, maybe this is how your data needs to look like, right? So then this piece is where all the transformation and ETL happens, right? Some glue jobs. And over here in this picture, you'll just see one ETL job, but it's like, I'll go through in more detail, but it's a combination of a lot of jobs, and your data transformation, whatever you want to do with it, happens at this layer of ETL jobs, right? Then once you polish that data, put in your business rules, put in all whatever you want to do with that data, and then you put it on another S3 bucket, which is the process bucket, right? After that, what we have is Athena, but it could be Redshift, it could be some other tool, but you could take out that data and use it as your need. One more step that we did is, instead of just putting it with Athena and analyzing your data, we give it a home, a data warehouse, and that's where all of our analytics tool uses that data from. Okay. So as I said before, we use AWS Glue, and especially me having a background of just AWS Cloud, and my previous background is more database developer, database architect. So I do good with data, but I'm not a coder, right? So I lack that skill. Like, I don't know too much Python. I don't know any other language comfortable to build automation writing code. So I took advantage of Glue Studio. So it's a graphical tool that lets you easily, do your transformation and do your ETL without even knowing too much of coding. So that's what we depend on. And this is one of the example of one ETL job on Glue so this is like a visual, visually you can, over here, like you can just click on visual. If you really know script and you want to look at the script, you could go to the script tab and look at your script, right? But the way I did, without knowing too much script, is just go to the visual. Here, all these things on the top, what you're seeing are my source files, right? Source tables. So I'm feeding in some data from these source tables that came from the Glue crawler. And then over here, I'm writing some SQL, okay? So I'm writing some SQL to transform the data the way I want it, right? There might be some business rules, there might be so many things, or you just need to clean the data, whatever it is. I'm writing those SQL to do that for me. Then, you could have some custom transformer or something like that put in place. The only reason I put this transformer in place is because one of our requirement was, we are going to run this entire cross-charge automation on a monthly basis. So what I want to do is I want to wipe the old month data, because that's already gone to the warehouse. I don't need it again. So I wipe that out, clean it, and run another load. And so that's what this transformation does, is just the cleaning job. And at the end, what I do is I give it a clean S3 bucket, right? So that's where my data goes after that. So on top of AWS Glue jobs that I use for just transforming the data and all the ETL, another easy tool that I use from AWS is workflows. Workflow is nothing but, the name suggests, right, is just step-by-step from start to finish. It's just a process, right? So how much ever jobs you want or you build for your transformation, you can put it in between that workflow and say, hey, after doing this step, do this step, then the third step, or a fourth step, or some steps could be running in parallel, right? So that's what this particular example also gives you. It's like, hey, you can put it on a schedule, or you can run it on demand. Then you could run few jobs in parallel. Over here, this example is just deduping the phone numbers, here fixing some phone numbers, some cleaning, and then it goes and updates the schema, right? This is just one simple example of how a workflow might be. This particular one is how we do our cross-charge at Pearson. Okay, so what we do in the initial phase is load all our raw files, which is the CUR data, some ADO metadata. What that means is more business unit, which account belongs to who's going to pay for it, all that kind of metadata. Some network sharing data, like that I received from some other teams on the network share, like, hey, all these accounts are using some network cost, so help me cross-charge that, right? So we load that data and run some business rules. So we, similarly, we receive other forms of data. This subscription data is just, we buy RIs and savings plan at various stages, throughout the year. Right? So the reason I put subscription data in here in our cross-charge model is because at any given month, our support percent varies from uses. If you have done billing on AWS, you know that every month, depending on your usage, you are charged a support fee, right? So we get that support fee on a master payer level. So now we, instead of the organization paying for all your support cost, we take that, distribute it among all the accounts, all the application, depending on their usage, and that's why we keep track of the subscription data, right? So what we do after we load all these raw files is run the crawler, and then it sets up the schema and everything. Then our process is, hey, let's load all the on-demand and marketplace data, okay? Then we load the RI and savings plan usage data. The reason these are two separate things is if you have knowledge about the CUR data, it doesn't put everything on a cost column, right? Everything is so complicated, and the cost is on so many different varieties, right? So what we do is just load all those data, and then we also calculate this network share cost that I was talking previously about. We clean the tags, okay? There are some business rules. We take in all the tags that we are going to do cross-charge against. Some of them might be bad ones, right? Some of them might not even exist. So we run some business rule to do that cleanup. Then we also put in some weight on every application that sits in an account, because some of the cost or credits or discounts are shared. So when I have to assign those shared costs without a tag, I need to know, like, hey, how much cash should I even give it to this application versus the other application? So that's why we calculate some weightage of the cost in that account, right? So then we calculate the network cost by the application ID, the network cost I was talking about over here. There's also some Kubernetes team that we have who helps us, other team members. If your own team is not doing Kubernetes and they don't know the architecture or stuff, there's another team that gives us that data and does that work for you. So we receive that data, also calculate that cost, and then after all these are calculated at the final, we calculate who pays what, right? So that's our model of, application level cross-charge that we do at Pearson, and it wasn't that tough, let me put it that way, right? Without being a coder, just using AWS Glue and some architecture, which is very simple to understand, we were able to build this entire automation in about, 3 or 4 months time, right? So these are just some key takeaways. Automation can be leveraged at any level in crawl, walk, run cycle. As James pointed out before, we did use automation at various stages of our FinOps lifecycle, right? So, and then organizational alignment is just as important as technology when making FinOps changes. as I kept telling, you don't need to be an expert at coding for building automation. So give it a shot. Like, even you think that you're not such a good programmer or you want to try it, there are tools out there. We used AWS Glue workflow, but there might be some other tools out there as well. So go ahead and explore and build in your automation, which will make your life much, much easier, right? And AWS Glue Studio, that's the tool we chose, but just because of its simple, graphical tool that, we could use easily.
And so, at this point, are there any questions?
We do. Let's definitely open up for questions. I want to also say where they can meet you tomorrow on day 2. There's places you guys can go talk if we run out of time for all of your questions, but I already see hands up. So yeah, just make sure you don't stand right in front of the speaker or we'll get feedback.
Come on, James.
I'm going to
I've
go to
learned
the other
that.
side.
I'm coming. Here you go.
Just a question. Why did you build rather than buy? How did you make that decision?
Because of our complicated structure of chargeback. So we did explore buy option, but due to our complexity on we have so many business rules behind who's going to pay what, so due to that complications behind the scenes stuff, like you saw that, we collect even network usage data. We collect data from some Kubernetes team that, just helps other teams out, and then we factor that in. So there are so many things like that that had to be put in place, and a buy option was not as customizable and, would serve our needs. So that's why we went the build route.
All right. Okay, over here. Just a moment.
Hi. Yeah. How much data is in one of your monthly cur files, and do you run into any limitations when you start wanting to look at long-term trends?
Our stake on AWS is very, very huge. I don't remember in terms of terabyte. Do you remember, James?
Not off the top of my head. No.
Yeah, I don't remember exactly, but it's huge, though, right? The reason we haven't gone into any problems yet, even with automation, is step 1, after we load the cur data, we do clean it on a monthly basis, but step 1 is all aggregation. So, all the data that comes in the cur, we aggregate and we put it on an application level. Right? So that makes it easier for the transformation, the other steps that we have on the glue job. After the first step of the aggregation is done, then the second step, you are dealing with so much less data.
All right. Any other? I like it when you're all in the same area and I barely move. Just come up. Here you go.
Thank you. So thanks for the presentation. I wanted to touch upon, there was one metric that you showed, right, with machine learning. You had said that you only achieve 60% of that efficiency. So do you have a roadmap, or what were the obstacles you faced to only get 60%?
Yep. And so with that one, that was actually a measure of accuracy of how many of the queries that was done correctly and passable. So when we did that, we had 5 queries that we were running at the time. I made about 5 different models for each one, and only 3 of them ended up being workable. So 60%. That's where you got that from.
All right. I traveled all the way to the other side of the room to find a question. Here you go.
Thank you. What you talk about in your flow to clean the app ID. So when you say clean the app ID, you completely clean up all the tag, or you fix the one that are not proper, or it's missing, and where did you get this information to fix it?
So it's like a business rule that we had to come up with, how to clean the data. So what we implemented on our side was, it's tough, right? Sometimes you put bad tagging, sometimes missing tags, maybe few resources they might not even be able to tag, right? So we get all those data. The cleaning business rule, in simple words, what we do is every account, we have a funding TAP ID in place. So a default TAP ID, okay? So that's a requirement on Pearson where, every account has to have a funding TAP ID. So if we cannot, if we don't know where to find the TAP ID, or if we're not able to clean it up, we default to the funding TAP ID, right? So that's the application that will pick up the cost if in case of the missing, right? But there are several attempts that we do to just clean it up, right? Sometimes it's uppercase, lowercase. Sometimes it could be people are using wrong prefix or something like that. But that's just business rule behind the scene. We do take an effort to clean it, but if we cannot, then it'll go to the default funding application ID.
All right, we have time for just a couple more questions, if there is anybody else. Oh, I was going to say, if I get to the front of the room and there's no other questions, we're done. But you're at the front of the room, so that was perfect.
So I was curious, after you have all of the data, did you actually do some things with BI tools and things on top of this to make more of it useful to certain business stakeholders? And can you talk a little bit about that?
Yes. So after Abhash does all the processing on the bill, it then comes into my world, and that's where the BI comes in. So we utilize Tableau to do as our dashboarding service to try to get the data out there. There are multiple different dashboards, particularly for finance and then for the operations team for their review. Operations team is probably more interested in how they're trending versus their budget. Overall, at least that's what we've found. Whereas finance is really just, what's the metadata? What's the easiest way that we can put it into the book? And we've built our dashboards around that. Does that answer your question? Yep. Very good. Oh, we got one more.
You guys, okay, so unfortunately, we're just saying that is time. If you want to ask them more questions, I'm sure they can answer them at the back of the room. Or also, this is enough showing off over there. You can meet them tomorrow at the Talk on Automation. But Abhash and James, thank you so much for talking to us about data lakes. Everybody, give them a big round of applause. Woo!
JR here from the FinOps Foundation. Thank you for watching. Please go to FinOps.org if you want to get plugged into this amazing community. And of course, hit subscribe right here on YouTube to get all the future content. Hope to see you soon.